Hi everyone, Teddy Baldassarre here, and in this video, we are going to be answering some of your questions I asked on our social media channels. What are some of the questions you have for me? So we're gonna be going through around 10 of those here today in this video. If you wanna be in the loop about future Q&As and you wanna ask some questions, be sure to follow us on all those different platforms. Also be sure to be subscribed here for the YouTube community posts so you get those updates. Closing in on 1 million subscribers as well, so any additional help in getting us there would be greatly appreciated. But all right guys, it is finally time to announce the winner for our $5,000 luxury watch shopping giveaway. This is something we started at the tail end of 2023, and after a lot of submissions, we're talking thousands of submissions, we're finally able to announce the winner. They were picked at random, and the winner is, can we get a drum roll somewhere? The winner of our competition, without further ado, is Ryan Mosasek. Ryan, apologies if I did not pronounce your last name incorrectly. I hope getting a $5,000 watch shopping spree is enough to make you feel better about any mispronunciations that I have here. But congrats to you, sir, and we'll be in touch with you about next steps. Also, a big thank you to all of you that participated in this giveaway. If you want to stay in the loop about future giveaways, be sure to subscribe here, follow on Instagram, all the different social channels, as well as sign up for our email newsletter, because that's another place where you'll get that information very quickly. But thanks again, and congrats to Ryan, our winner. The first question here asks, if you could build an entire watch collection using only one brand, which brand would it be? Thanks, Teddy. So this is gonna greatly depend on the amount of money you have to spend. So I could go ahead and say if money is no issue, I could just spend all the money in the world, and that's gonna change my answer here. So I have this broken down into 4 different options, but the brand that I would look for any of these would be one that is going to be versatile in terms of its offering. I want watches from a variety of different styling options, case options, and also if there is some flexibility with complication type and where you can aspire to maybe get a little bit more, even if you are going to be constrained by a budget, that is going to be where I am going to look. So that first tier, I would say Seiko. That would be the brand I would build with if I had less money to spend. You have all the different Seiko 5 models, Dress KX, 5KX, Field models, GMTs, Presage family, the Cocktail Times, Prospects models, that's the Alpinists, the Samurais, Turtles, Speed Timers. There's so much to get lost in. And then you have, in addition to that, the Luxe collection with things like the SPB 143, the Sharp Edge collection, Marine Masters, Alpinist GMT, Sumo models, and there's just so much to get lost in. So that would be the first brand that I would probably look at. Then the next tier up, if I had to pick another brand, it's all about versatility. Again, Longines, I think they have one of the most diverse portfolios and archives of any brand in the entire industry. I mean, just say some of these things out loud and tell me you couldn't build a collection with this. Hydro Conquest, Zulu Time, and Spirits, which include different case materials and complication types. You have the Conquest series, the Legend Diver, Flagship Heritage, the Heritage Collection in general, and just being one of the brands that was responsible for this vintage reissue craze that we've seen in the last decade. The Dolce Vita collection, the Ultrachron, the Sector Dials, Avigation Big Eye, and other chronographs to choose from. Then in the luxury tier, I think you have a couple different options you can go for. So I'm looking for like more of the mass market luxury brands that we know of all the time. So for this, I'd look at something like a Rolex or an Omega. If I had to pick one, I probably would go with Omega because I think there is a bit more diversity in terms of the different models you can go for within the collections. And also they have some more aspirational pieces in regards to complication type. If we're speaking to watchmaking only, not just case material, I think that's where Omega can excel. When you have things like a basic Seamaster Diver 300, the different Speedmaster models, that include the 57 edition, the professional 38mm moon phase. You have the chronoscope, the racing Speedmaster Aquaterras within the Seamaster collection. There's just so many things to consider. But then also at the tie end, you have things like the Chrono Chime and the DeVille Tourbillon if you wanted to really get crazy. Not every mass market luxury brand is going to produce that level of watchmaking and have watches like that available to you. And then for high horology, if I had to pick one brand, I would probably go with Patek Philippe just because of that diversity. Same premise here. They have solid sports watches. You have the Aquanaut and the Nautilus, like the 5167, 5164, 5968. The Nautilus family is going to be very vast as well with different complication types and looks. 5712 and 5726 are absolutely beautiful. 5980 is a grail for so many people out there that love Patek and the Nautilus. Different Calatrava series, you have the Ellipse as well. And then if you're looking at complications, I would argue Patek has the broadest catalog of any brand in the entire industry at this tier. Different complications to choose from. World Timer, they have probably the best in all of watchmaking in my opinion. Different calendar options, annual calendars, perpetuals, calendar chronographs, dual times, regulators. You have it pretty much all available to you with Patek Philippe. So I would say those are my 4 picks. If I had to build a brand, it does depend on how much money you have available to yourself, but if I had to narrow it down to 4 of them and looking at all different price ranges and buckets, those would be my choices. The next question asks, what is the most underrated Rolex model? So this was a question when I received it. I wanted to think about it a little bit before just jumping in front of camera. So I was going through some different thoughts as I was gonna go to camera here. And I was thinking about the Milgauss, but now that that's been discontinued, it's almost gotten another wave of excitement going towards it because that's how we act. As soon as we know that we can't get something anymore or becomes even more difficult to get something, then it ultimately starts to get more appreciated. So weird how that works. The 1908 is way too new. I know people talked about the Cellini for many years, but that's been discontinued now for the 1908. And that's only been out for a certain period of time. And it's also competing in a range where I don't think you could talk about it in the same way, given that's going to be priced around things like some of the entry-level Vacherons of the world, as well as like Lange. So that's a tough area to be competing on. So I had 3 watches that I would consider. One would be the Yachtmaster. I think it's an underrated piece by Rolex standards. All Rolex watches, probably not underrated by industry standards, but for Rolex as an individual identity and concept, I think you could argue the Yachtmaster is one of the most underrated. Same with the Air King. This is another watch that wasn't always top of mind. It's had kind of an up and down history within Rolex's collection. But the other watch I want to throw in here, and this was kind of maybe my choice, and it's crazy to say out loud, and I have a couple reasons why I wanted to include it, is the Rolex Explorer. If I had to pick the most underrated, and by underrated I'm saying doesn't get the appreciation it deserves, I would say the Explorer from a general mass market perspective. Yes, the Yachtmaster is very solid. Yes, the Air King is a solid watch. But the Explorer to me is almost outside of the Submariner and maybe the GMT Master 2, the most recognizable Rolex design. And in addition was also the design DNA that made it possible for these other sports models from Rolex to continue forward. Would the Submariner look the way it does without the Explorer? I would say no. That was the original design DNA that was created where many of these other sports watches were developed. The other point here too is you think about all the different watches from Rolex. There are many that are going to be trading above retail value, but some of the ones that are trading the closest to retail value are the Explorers, specifically the 36mm Explorer. At the time of recording this video, that watch is only trading $650 more than retail. To me, that is ridiculous considering all these other watches that trade over retail. I think it's one of the most perfect one watch collections, and not as many people want it. Maybe because it's not as hype, maybe it's because it doesn't look like a Rolex. It doesn't have maybe the same look with the bezel that you'll find on the Submariner or a GMT Master 2 or a Datejust with its fluted bezel that's a bit more flashy and more emblematic of Rolex. The Explorer somehow doesn't give off that same effect to the modern consumer of Rolex, or maybe people that know of Rolex nowadays. So probably the safe pick is something like a Yachtmaster or an Air King, but if I had to say the most underappreciated, underrated, and you're considering what it brings to the table, historically speaking, and just what it could represent for a collector if they're looking for one watch as maybe the best luxury watch all around for the money, I think the Explorer might actually take the crown here. So what makes micro brands no more micro? Manufacturing volume, sales figures, or not unique anymore? So I have defined this in a couple of videos. So how I would classify a micro brand and define it is a micro brand is a smaller upstart without in-house manufacturing or proprietary capabilities, often run by a single person or a small team with small production volumes. So a few things to break down within that definition, basically 3 points. So one of those points is how long have they been around? Number 2 is manufacturing capabilities, and 3 is how large is the team and how big is their production. One other thing I'd mention is price doesn't necessarily have anything to do with being a micro brand in my opinion. It really comes down to those other points. Again, this is very opinionated, and some brands don't like the term micro brand because it does have some baggage because you are lumping so many different brands in here at different tiers, and some owners of brands will like this terminology more than others. Just some examples to throw out there, like where I could draw the line, and maybe you could think about this as well. Anordain, they're a brand that haven't been around a long time, relatively speaking, generally smaller production, so that's not really where you would draw the line, but they do their own in-house enameling and making their own dials and have a unique design style to go along with it. I think that is where maybe you can make that cutoff where they're starting to get more into that independent status. They also have more time that goes into producing their products, and with owning that studio in-house to produce these dials, I think that probably allows them to separate and maybe not be seen in the same way. Another brand that I'd mention here is Formex. I'd say they're more of an independent based on this definition because yes, they haven't been around that long, since 1999. Their production volume is not that large, but what they're able to do from a manufacturing standpoint is, I think, an elevated standard that is probably even surpassing some brands that are seen as more mainstream and larger in production. The CEO of Formex has family ties and connection to a manufacturer called Dexel. They produce a lot of clasps, cases, and bracelets for other brands within the industry. So that's where you get that patented case technology that you'll see from some of Formex's watches. And to me, that's where you can draw a line and say you're starting to get into a new tier. And another brand that I throw in here as kind of starting to rise up is Christopher Ward. And this is where you start to draw that line in a different way, both from a production standpoint and how many watches they're selling, because they have scaled up to a degree where I would say they're getting into these numbers of some of the larger brands that we classify in the industry. Also, they own a manufacturing, third-party manufacturer for movements. They've also done some interesting trailblazing ideas like the Bel Canto. Even though they're working with different suppliers and manufacturers to make this, they have their own in-house capabilities and are doing things in a unique way. Also, the design that goes into some of those products, something like a Bel Canto, has now become pretty recognizable, and that's something that they can own as their own. So microbrands, it's a pretty loaded term. Not everybody loves the definition and where we're drawing these lines, but that's my best attempt at doing so. Our next question asks, as a young collector, 2 years ago, I bought my first mechanical watch. Do you have any advice on things to avoid or lean into while looking to make my first luxury watch purchase under $5,000? Again, this is not a perfect science either, but if I could give any advice, I would say take your time. Do not feel a rush in the process of trying to buy a luxury watch. When you are purchasing something too at this degree, it's always better to hold out to get what you really want than maybe to give into that instant gratification. Also get into a point where you can really afford the watch. I think there's a time where people want to get into this watch so quickly that maybe they jump the gun just slightly where it's not as comfortable of a situation to do so. If you need to wait a little bit, it's okay. It's not a problem. Just do it when you can. And I think that's the best way forward, because then you'll be able to enjoy the watch that much more and that watch doesn't end up owning you. Also, it's going to come down to subjectivity. I get asked all the time, like, what's a better watch, this watch or this watch? And it's like, one's a chronograph, one's a dive watch. They're totally different in styling. Like, I can't answer that question for you. So you also have to let go to a point where you're doing all this research. Research is so important as you're getting into this, but the final decision does start and end with you. You have to be able to make that yourself, because this is an individual journey that you're on. Yes, throughout that journey, you can have conversation with other collectors. There are certainly things to learn, but you also have to understand that there is an element of isolation that you need to have when making these decisions. And I don't say that to put you on an island and make this even more intimidating to make this decision and overwhelming to do so. But I do think you have to remind yourself that this is my decision to make. This is not anybody else's decision to make, and you buy a watch because you like it. Further, I would really encourage you to look at what your day-to-day lifestyle is. This would be the case for a watch. This would be a case for any clothing item that you have or anything that you look to enjoy. If you cannot find aspects of your lifestyle where this would be able to overlap perfectly, then that probably isn't a watch for you. If you are wearing a suit every day, probably doesn't make sense to get the Omega Pro Prof, even though it's really cool. It's up to you though. You just have to be real with yourself and what your lifestyle is, and make sure that that watch can be enjoyed to the fullest degree. And finally, one other thing I'll just mention is, if you're on the fence, maybe do a pros and cons list between two different watches. Like, what are the traits that you like about that watch versus another? I know that's silly, but I always, whenever making a big decision, and I've even done it for a watch purchase before, wrote down pros and cons associated with it, and that's always helped me feel better when moving forward. Is any of this groundbreaking information? Probably not, but sometimes you don't always need that. You just need to be reminded of what maybe you already know, and maybe you already know some of this, but I think that's good to be reminded of. Next question asks, why is the Overseas so undervalued compared to the Royal Oak or Nautilus? I think it comes down to a simple point, and that is that the Royal Oak came out in 1972, the Nautilus came out in 1976, and where the Overseas can find its direct lineage, or maybe indirect lineage, is to a 1977 release with the 222. But that wasn't really even the official Overseas. We'd have to move to the 1990s and 1996 when the Overseas came out. So the reality is, The watch came out last of the big three that you're going to predominantly think of when looking at those high horology brands of integrated steel sports watches. Further, you have the whole Gerald Genta connection. I think that has something to do with it. Sometimes people confuse that the 222 was designed by Gerald Genta. That is not the case. But the Royal Oak and the Nautilus probably gets some additional cachet because of that affiliation with Gerald Genta. And one other point that I'd mention is Vacheron has had a little bit more of an up and down last, say, 40 years. Now they're doing better than they've done in quite some time. So the brand has really set up this solid footing for themselves. But years ago, it wasn't always the case. So with some more up and downs compared to something like a Patek Philippe, that's also going to have an impact on its cultural relevance and even within the collector community. Next question asks, at risk of drawing too fine a point to it, I'd like to get your take on the difference between a watch collector and an enthusiast. If I had to simplify it down, a enthusiast is somebody that is going to have an interest in a topic or a subject, typically will also be more into collectibles and things of that sort, so there might be a little crossover there. But then a collector is anyone who collects a thing, like actually tangibly holds something and will like to accumulate different things, typically associated with a hobby, or maybe even have it for professional reasons. Now, not every enthusiast necessarily needs to be a collector, and not every collector is an enthusiast. I think most of the times they overlap, but that's not always the case. I know some people that are the biggest watch enthusiasts that I know that might have only one watch, and I know actually several of them. I also know somebody very close to me that doesn't really own any watches, but they know more about independent watchmaking than anybody. Just their taste almost extends beyond what their financial situation can allow them to obtain. So it has just created this interesting kind of scenario where they love watchmaking, they love the art of it, but they don't really collect that often. And I think that's admirable. I think the fact that you can love something even if you don't collect it is pretty interesting, but it does happen all the time in other areas. Like many people I knew growing up loved automobiles and cars and were like petrol heads, but they're young kids and they can't afford anything. Some of them at the time were big car enthusiasts but didn't even have a license. So I think it can exist. I think there's also people that have amazing collections, but they, at the core of it, don't really even like the things that they're collecting. They're almost just accumulating objects. That's something that I think about actively, and it's another reason why I typically don't do collection-oriented videos, because I want it to be my own personal journey and don't want to feel like I have to put on a show with what I collect. This Q&A has a lot of me defining terms and trying to draw a line, so I guess it's just one of those days. Next question asks, what do you think about people thinking AP is tainting its image by teaming up with Marvel/Travis Scott? I think it's great, but a lot of people expect horology to be classical and elegant and not modern and fun. So obviously, clearly a risk for AP to be doing this stuff, but also if you look at where AP's growth has come in the last, say, 20 to 30 years, it hasn't been from collectors only. It's come from broadening their base and also thinking about its appeal across the public of just mass market type of consumers. And we can debate all we want whether or not Travis Scott is the right person to collab with from a branding standpoint, or Black Panther, just putting Black Panther, a Marvel superhero, right at the center of a dial, is that the right thing to do? We can argue that, but one thing you can't dispute is that it does not fail in getting people to talk about the brand. But there is a risk with this. The question AP has to ask themselves, and I know that they are asking themselves, is with these different models, they have to appeal to a broader consumer base or new consumers, which is incredibly important for all of these brands for the longevity. How do we reach new people without pissing off our current base that much? And if we do move in this direction for new consumers, and can we do it to a degree where those consumers that are currently loyal to us will not get so annoyed that they would move on? That is the balancing act that AP is going for. Now, in some direction, people are maybe yelling louder than they're actually acting. I think many people that leave comments on those posts are not actual AP buyers, so that is one thing to maybe look at. But they might be future AP buyers, and that is still important. And what people think about you, what the social circles that you're seeing, even in comment sections, that does have an effect on maybe somebody wanting to pull the trigger on a watch and make it a priority to save up to buy something. I think the premise, though, what AP is doing is smart. We can debate the watches, whether or not they're good looking, and that's a whole conversation to have. But if you're trying to reach new consumers, I think it makes sense. Like, these get people talking more than almost any other watches in the industry when they do these type of things. And talking to a Travis Scott, given what I see like in the hip hop community, I'm not so tied into it, but even if you listen to like hip hop passively over the last 20 years, one of the brands you hear about is AP. You hear Royal Oak. Like, these are things that have been ingrained within that community. And I think as much as we want to think that watches are just for collectors, AP, Patek, Rolex, these type of brands don't have a single target audience. They're not just these collectors. There's a lot of reasons to buy these watches, and it's not the same reason maybe you and I will buy these watches. And I think we have to be understanding of that and understand that also the brands have different objectives that are not just based on our own desires and wants. Next question asks, do you have any other type of high quality machine gear like pocket knives or pens? So the short answer is no. I certainly appreciate finely made things, and high quality craftsmanship is something that I can appreciate regardless of what we're talking about. And when somebody has enthusiasm for something, that's infectious to me. I don't even have to be into the subject matter. People tell me all the time, just because I get so into talking about watches, like they don't even have any interest in it, but I just get all excited about it, and they like the passion more than even the subject itself, and that keeps them interested, which I think says a lot. Montblanc pens, things like that, I've never really dove into that world, but I could see some interest there. The other quality items that I like to accumulate mostly are around heritage brands and say Goodyear welted boots, stitch down boots, like that stuff that I've kind of become a little bit more ingrained within that community, and I like, you know, learning more about that. Also selvage denim, big fan of all of this, and just learning about how these old crafted materials were built on these loom machines back in the day, and how also like Japanese selvage denim, like that's something I'm very interested in too. Anything finely made and something that's made to last and also can tell a little bit about ourselves and be part of our human experience, because I don't want to be caught up in material just for material's sake. The reason why I like certain objects or things is because of how they can connect to our human experience, and how when we use them, they become a part of us. Like that is the only way I can even value a good and a creation of a product. That is what I connect with more than really anything else. Of course, there's some design elements, but that all goes hand in hand with that same theory that I have about it being an element of who we are. If I don't have any connection to that product and I can't see how I can use it, then it's hard for me to see it anything more than just a simple object on a table or just laying out. But if you have any creators on YouTube or anywhere else that you would recommend me getting lost in, for whether you're talking about pens or maybe knives, I'm interested in anything. I like all those different worlds, so I'll leave some comments down below. I can use another more expensive hobby, I'm sure of it. This question asks, why don't manufacturers offer an easily adjustable clasp and quick release spring bars on metal bracelets? Shouldn't these features be standard offerings? So I agree that on-the-fly adjustment and having that ability without the need for tools is a huge value add for an owner of a watch. I will throw out this one rebuttal to that, because I don't think enough enthusiasts consider this, because they're always like, why can't I have on-the-fly adjustment within this bracelet? A lot of bracelets are not just set up to have room for on-the-fly adjustment. If you have more of a dress-oriented bracelet and clasp that is not trying to have this chunkier clasp on the reverse side, it's gonna be more seamless, have this clean just taper and transition into a locking mechanism, then it doesn't make that much sense, especially if you're integrating that within the bracelet, so almost like a hidden clasp within. That's just not going to work. So you're not gonna have the room for 5 to 10 millimeters of micro adjustment within. And if you look at T-Fit, Glide Lock, and some other offerings from like Omega and the systems that they have, those are nice clasps, it's a great feature, but also it comes at maybe a compromise you have to make on the size and how long that clasp might be. Like the Tudor Pelagos, T-Fit is amazing on that clasp, and I think it's a great feature, but also it does add to the length of that, where the clasp on the reverse side is the same size and length as the entire watch on the reverse side. So it's a give and take. But further, I do think there are brands that simply just don't recognize that this is a useful feature yet. Micro adjustment I can live without if I get small half links, but becomes more problematic when you don't have half links and it is a sports watch. On a sports watch, like something like a Rado Capsule Cook, not to like pick on them, but they have a clasp with open area for, even if they drilled holes in it for micro adjustment, they just choose not to do it. To me, I think that is one of those areas where like, come on, just punch the holes in there. It would make the watch, I think, a bit better. Quick release bars, I am not as big on that. I can also deal with like drilled lugs as being another alternative to it. Sometimes I've noticed too, when you have built-in integrated spring bars on a bracelet especially, it can affect, if it is rounded off, how much that bracelet can shoot straight down on the wrist. It does affect the mobility sometimes, not crazy amount. Some brands have gotten around this better than others, but that is a consideration. Sometimes it's a bit more like at a hinge point. Because of that quick release sitting out on the back end, you can't allow it to get very flat and will shoot down or even more around with the wrist. But on the fly adjustment, that is an area that absolutely I think would like to see more of. Another reason too is going to be cost. Now that is only in the instance of brands under say $500 to $1,000 when they're just stamping out components, just producing a ton of watches. But as you start to get up to a certain tier, I would say around $1,500 to $3,000, like that's where you're going to start seeing that become more possible. It now just comes down to maybe brands not even recognizing that this is a feature that people want to see, which if you're vocal about it enough and you start to see brands like a Tudor start to pick up with T-Fit and making that a more standardized type of approach that they are bringing forward with their watches, then other brands in the industry are going to ultimately notice it and start doing it too. So if I had to bet, would imagine we're going to see more of that on-the-fly adjustment in the future. But again, that is probably a feature that many brands are still not yet aware is as big of a deal for enthusiasts as it actually is. But all right, guys, that's my video here for today, answering some of your questions. If you did enjoy it and you enjoy these style of videos, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. I noticed that about 66%, so like 2/3 of the people that watch this channel are not subscribed. So if you are one of those people, not to call you out, please do subscribe, would appreciate it. We're closing in on 1 million subscribers, so any help in getting us there, would appreciate that. Also, definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. And how we're able to fund all of our productions here, travel across the globe, do all these different manufacturer visits is through selling watches on our site. So if you are in the market for a watch, we'd love to have your business. Allows us to keep doing what we're doing here, and we love what we do. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.